Voices, a fresh perspective on voting,
politics, and power.
Hello, guys. So today we have panelists. They are student activists from Pennsylvania. They're all high school students. They're all amazing, and they all do different things. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. What groups are they repping? And, how did they get into activism? And so first I'll introduce myself. My name is Sheyla. I'm part of PA Youth Vote, and I'm also a part of the Philly Black Student Alliance. And Anika here is joining me today to help ask our panelists questions. So let's get into it. So one of our panelists, just jump in, introduce yourself real quick. Let's get it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby. I'm a senior in high school, and I go to school in Eastern Pennsylvania. I've done a lot of voting rights activism within this past year, in addition to racial equality activism, leading different charges at my school. And I currently work with a nonprofit organization called Redefy, which is an international social justice organization by teens for teens.
What's up, guys? I'm Kenny. I'm a senior at Central High School. I'm involved with social justice with the 215 People's Alliance. We work across the city with sort of people who are politicians, other leaders in the community. I'm also a volunteer cook at the 215 People's Kitchen. This is a community institution that serves 200 to 300 meals a day to people in need in the city. And I also recently started Fridges and Family. We currently have installed a free food community fridge in South Philly. Yeah, that's the merch. She got a tote bag to help us out with our operations. And yeah, our mission is just to open up some more community fridges around the country. We're currently working in Minnesota, New Jersey, and Arizona to open up some more fridges to combat food insecurity, as well as to eliminate food waste, because there are a lot of restaurants and supermarkets that are throwing out food that people couldn't use right now.
I'll go. So, hi guys, my name is Lin, and I'm a queer non-binary organizer around Philadelphia. And a lot of my work is going with the local grassroots organization, Asian Americans United, where we tackle issues like gentrification and housing rights around Philly. So we've been doing a lot of work around that. And also a major part of my organizing is to provide more political education to the community around Chinatown in Philadelphia, and especially around the Asian American Pacific Islander community in Philadelphia. And I also have been doing a lot of mutual aid work, because I think that that's very important to have it much more locally instead of being it's all big, towards a lot of elders in Philadelphia, particularly around South Philadelphia. And it's really nice to meet you all here.
Hello, my name is Youma. I'm a senior at Central High School. I work with UrbEd Advocates, which is a nonprofit in Philly, started in Philly by Philadelphia School District students, now alum, pretty much that just works on amplifying student voice for all of these different actions that are passed in the school district, for all of these different things. So anything from schools reopening to school police, mental health, these are all different topics and projects that we work on. I also work with the Philly Black Student Alliance with Sheyla, which is really just about building, and not only building, but supporting Black student unions in a school district, and creating a network of Black students in a safe space for Black students, as well as Black teachers, to come and kind of get to know each other beyond our schools.
That was really great. You guys are doing such amazing work. I am totally inspired, and I know everyone listening in is definitely going to be too. So I guess we want to start off the conversation with, how did you guys get involved with activism? Was it scary? And what really made you do it?
I can start on why I really got into it. I think that for me, it's very different from other people. I did it out of spite, because I think that a lot of the times when we were doing certain things, I recognized that a lot of the people in power, they will say it in a very specific way. They're take little steps. Don't go too far. Just be a little bit slow in the process. And they're oh, we will give you time, but the time never comes. So I think that a lot of it is putting things into your own hands and start working on it on your own. And then when you go outside of that and you start going outside of your circle, you start meeting people who really believe in the same thing as you. Because I think one of the things that really got me into it is because when someone told me that the only time they learned about Asian American history was during college, when they had to pay to go to these Asian American studies. And I was just this should be in middle school, this should be in elementary school, this should be in high school, right? Where it's free and everyone has access to it. So that really got me really pissed off. And then especially in my school, Central High School, 20 years ago, there used to be an Asian American Studies course, but then it only happened because an Asian kid was beat up in the lunchroom. That's how they kind of like reflected on that. But then 20 years later, it's not there anymore because they're like, oh, nobody's interested. So therefore we take that option away. So then we're trying to do a lot of work right now, especially as a junior. I'm kind of young in this chat, in this group, and then trying to do that for the last 1 year of my high school career. And I want to continue doing that. So then even if it doesn't really happen, I hope that like younger people start feeling like this is like a right thing to do, especially in a high school setting.
I kind of got into activism. My mom works with SEIU, which is just a big union across PA. And anybody that does union work knows it's just about advocating for workers' rights and stuff like that. So kind of always been in this field of, advocating for what's correct. I think the more recent activism that I've been doing kind of just sparked with just being in school and kind of going with what Lin said about teaching people about the people that they're around. Like people should know about people beyond white people. So in terms of education, in terms of support, especially going to magnet schools, coming from Masterman and then going to Central and just seeing these record low numbers of Black students at these schools when Philadelphia is 51 or 52% Black is frustrating. And a lot of people don't want to come to these schools because, we're not seeing anyone like us. So to allow students, just really with the goal of pushing students to be able to get the educations that these magnet schools offer, but also being able to get this enrichment, this cultural enrichment as well, because both of those things are important.
I got into mutual aid and sort of feeding people and making sure their basic needs are met. During the start of COVID, I just found that I had a lot of free time, and I saw that, growing already existing problems of food insecurity, of poverty were already existing before COVID. And, it was sort of not like the perfect time, but, it was a time where I had a lot of time. So that's why I really started doing stuff for the poor and the less fortunate, such as the soup kitchen and the community fridge work.
I think that for the vast majority of my life, I've been like really immersed in community service. But it wasn't until my sophomore year of high school, when I was 15, I kind of started working toward improving my community on my own. So my school offered this like social justice grant, and I applied for it. I didn't really think much would come out of it, but I just wanted to help some people, and I won. So I spent that following summer volunteering for a month at a local nonprofit that helped with housing insecurity and homelessness and helped new immigrants get acclimated to our area where I live. And then I think, my work kind of subsided as the school year picked back up again. But when the pandemic hit last year, I wanted to further my activism. So I reached out to people at Redefy, which I work for now. And I was like, hey, I want to get involved. I started working with Sheyla with When We All Vote. And then I I led some initiatives within my school after some of the Black Lives Matter uprisings to, make sure that we had like mental health resources for Black kids, because my school is overwhelmingly white. And sometimes kids would go to different counselors and, the counselors would direct them to help elsewhere because they said they couldn't really help Black kids, which I didn't think was adequate. And also just like strengthening our curriculum to make sure that Black people are represented and people of color and minorities can see themselves in the stuff that they learn.
Thank you, Shelby. That was a great response. And it kind of leads into another question that we have for all the panelists, because obviously, you guys got into activism for different reasons, but we're kind of trying to get at the core of activism. And so we wanted to know if you think there's a relationship between service and activism, and what is that relationship? And just like go into describing, service and activism. Do they go hand in hand? How do they go hand in hand? You can go into your own experience. So let's get into it.
I guess I'll just jump into that. I think a really big part of activism is being selfless. And that means pushing a lot of different initiatives, even if it's not an initiative or a movement that you started. when different orgs, or when I am working on a project for something and I'm asking for a lot of support from a lot of outside organizations, you have to have that energy to make sure that you're supporting the different initiatives that they're pushing. And I think that also just builds community. So in terms of activism is a lot of service. It's not always, marching. There's a lot of behind the scenes that goes on. It's a lot of work. And I think always making sure that you remember that your goal is to give back to your community, then you'll be successful in what you're doing.
I think that, like, if I really have to say what really is the connection between service and activism, is actually really love. Because I think that without love, during a lot of the times, I think everyone here understands, organizing is a very tiresome labor. Like, you would sit there and be like, am I doing enough? Am I like providing enough? Am I making some sort of change? Or is it just out of nothing, right? I'm just sitting here tired doing nothing, right? So I think that, like, the way that a lot of us are continuing is because we really believe that liberation for our community will happen. Like, we are all going towards it. Even if it's not under our generation, we at least are pushing it a little bit further for the next generation to reach that point, right? So I think that, like, the connections there is especially out of love, because especially if it's out of radical love, then it goes somewhere. Because sometimes a lot of people do things because, oh, it's very popular now. Oh, it's something that's like very performative now. So everyone's doing it, so therefore I have to do it. But then a lot of them do not believe in that. A lot of them do not believe in the liberation of marginalized people. And then they are just saying it because it's like, oh, the corporations are saying it, but then the corporations aren't really kind of like want you to be liberated, right? And then I think that, like, a lot of us, we do work to make sure that people do know, are 100% sure that what they are doing right now ensures our liberation. I think that right now with service and activism, the way social media portrays activism is kind of like something like, oh, you post on Instagram, so therefore you're woke now, therefore you're doing the work now. And then, like, I think that a lot of people are using that as an advantage to, like, go places. Like, they want to walk up that stairs and they will leave you behind in order to do that, right? They're going to say that, oh, we're going to, like, change everything for you. Oh, you're people of color. Okay, we're going to change this whole policy. But then when they're there, they will forget what they totally said there in the first place. So I think that a lot of us really need to reflect on, like, when people talk about activism and service, you must clearly see that this person truly loves the community that they're serving. And it's not just something so that they can get something out of it. Because anything I do, I never really want anything out of it. I just want people to be able to feel love, and I want people to be able to feel valued and not disposable. For me, the connection between service and activism is problem solving. I think, when we see a problem in our communities, it's up to us. We usually see, our government institutions saying that this problem isn't relevant. We don't have enough money for this problem, and a lot of other excuses. And so I really think it is up to us for service and activism.
Yes, thank you guys. So, part of the service that I know I do as activists is like registering people to vote. And obviously PA Youth Vote is partly about voting, but it's not just about voting. We also have, we have a podcast committee. We have an advocacy committee, which writes letters. We're planning on going to Harrisburg. We have different things that we're doing, but obviously at the core of our work is service and really having those conversations and educating people. So this leads into our next question for the panelists, which Anika will ask.
So we've been talking about voting, and really we just want to get your perspective on, do you believe voting and being civically engaged is a form of activism? And really, do you think that, like, why do Gen Z vote, or why don't Gen Z votes? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I'll touch on this because I think that this is something I've been really immersed in this past year. I think that, being a democracy, voting is inherently important because that's how we choose who's going to represent us on different levels of government. I think that within the pandemic, our generation just dealing with like school closures and seeing how poorly it's been handled in the United States, I think that a lot of Gen Zers really recognized that we need competent people in office. And, that starts with us being civically engaged and learning what these politicians are representing. But I think that that's only a certain sector of Gen Z, and that sometimes people of color who are, young and old may feel a little bit of apathy just because, Historically, when we make some advantages, people try to bring us back. We see that in Georgia right now with, all the voting disenfranchisement tactics and how voting rights are being stripped from people. And so I think that civic education is very, very important just to ensure that people recognize their own power and then use that to their advantage to benefit their own communities.
I think that with voting and being civically engaged, it's something that's very important as a person living in this country. But I think that behind it, there's also so many things against that, right? Because I think that voting has so much history of oppression, like redlining, things like, they don't want certain people to vote, right? So I think that it's a lot of people see voting as you just register and then you get to go to the voting booth and you're going to vote for who you want, right? But then I think that's different when you look at the news for the past couple of months where they said that these lines are really long and then they would close, or COVID situations, right? And then we're people in the South, they're writing in laws where we will stop you from voting because of showing your ID, right? So then it's it's harmful to a lot of people. So I think that oftentimes we can't really look at it and be people are lazy and people don't want to go vote. It's because the system is already against you and they do not want you to vote. So then a lot of people don't vote. And I think that oftentimes coming from my perspective and living around Northeast, there's a lack of translations and a lack of resources towards voting. People do not know where to go vote. So then they have to go online, but then a lot of people don't know how to go online, go on the internet, right? So then people don't have access to the internet. So that creates a huge another gate for you can't vote now, right? And then with COVID, I remember that Philly used to do a lot of work where people used to go to these people's houses and help you translate on the forms and then help you fill out the forms to vote, right? Now we can't do that because of the pandemic. And then I think that in the future now there will be much more horrible laws in place and voting policies where then people can't do certain things. And then that stops huge levels of poor people of color from voting. So I think that while we believe that, being able to vote and registering to vote is a role that it's civic, but then you need to address the issues that stops other people from voting. Right? I think that's one of the key ways on how to actually be an activist is try to address the issues and the oppression behind voting.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Lin. That's what we really try to do here at PA Youth Vote and get people to see that it's not just simple. Like we said, it's not just register to vote and vote, but actually being an educated and informed voter. And we literally saw voter suppression when we were doing volunteer work with the early voting lines. I literally remember arguing with them. People were coming home from work trying to come vote and they were trying to get in 3-hour lines and they were restricting people no, we're closing the lines early because we don't feel like staying up. And it's dude, you want to stop democracy because of the check? And that's another thing that's I think is just important about activism, what you guys have all said, is doing things because you care and because you want to do them, not for a check and not for clout. And, that's how I think we can just move forward in general. So I don't know if any other panelists want to speak to this question or we can move on to the next one.
I think that something that informed, I like to say this, I think informed people often assume that everyone is just as informed as them. So again, going with what Lin was saying, a lot of people assume that people understand how to vote. A lot of people grew up in households where religiously they weren't allowed to vote. I grew up in a household like that. So getting to high school and people are telling you to register to vote in elections where you don't even know what these positions mean. I think another issue is that a lot of times we only magnify and push out, society only magnifies and pushes out these presidential elections. And if we're being honest, those people have roles and they have an importance, but in terms of our community, those elections are almost pointless. These small local elections and picking our council members, our judges, stuff like that, these are the elections that make or break our communities. But a lot of people aren't informed about that because the way the society makes it seem is that the president is the end all be all, and they're the only people, that's the only election that matters. So I think just making sure that there's not only accessible information, but information that's explained, because if you go on all of these government websites and try to understand what these positions mean, there's all the different levels of the judges are doing for the election in May. people don't know what these judges do. They don't know what they're doing. And I want people to also be honest about how much work it is to vote. You don't just go and pick a person. You have to research who they are, what they stand for. You could be picking someone who is not even for anything that you're for. So it's a lot of work to vote. But in the long run, it's worth it for you and your community.
I absolutely believe that voting is a form of activism. We can use our power to vote to basically fire people that we don't think are taking care of what we voted them in for, or what we thought they were going to do for us. As far as voting, I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't vote, because honestly, I think a lot of older generations have experienced rule from both parties, and they haven't seen their lives getting better, and they haven't seen their needs taken care of. But I know because of like work from you guys, we are seeing, more Black people in office, more Asian people in office. We're seeing more women in office. It's not all old white men that don't come from where we come from and haven't lived our experiences. So I think, it's a lot of problems with voting, but we're definitely getting there.
Another thing that I want to touch on is like some of the class privilege involved in voting, because the fact that, many election days aren't federal holidays, and so people can still be required to go into work and don't have time to take off. Like, I come from a working class family, and so I've had family members who haven't been able to work because their shift time is incompatible with when the elections offices, they close. And that is such a massive issue that we have to tackle in order to ensure that everyone can actually vote and participate, and that the true best candidates go on to serve in those positions.
Yes, those were all very great answers. And I think something that runs across what all you guys were saying points to education. And that's something, again, that our advocacy committee is working on with the school district, trying to get voter education and registration in our schools, because it's not mandated. Although Central, we do it because we have a team and because we have some teachers who actually care. Most schools do not teach this. And they just assume, like Youma was saying, that, that's something you're going to do at home. That's something that you're going to learn. And we don't want to force people to register, because at the end of the day, it's a choice to vote, but they should be presented with the opportunity and the education to do it. So I know Anika has something she's going to lead into our next question.
And yeah, I think that brings up a really good point about really connecting to the people on how they can vote and really why they're voting. So we talked about how voting isn't always an accessible option to people, whether it's through class or education, but everyone here has a voice and wants to make change. So what are some alternate ways that you guys think are good to get involved with your community and really make that change that isn't necessarily voting or protesting?
I think just participating. A lot of people don't participate in things in their community. It can be small things, little events that people throw, to really build a community. Because I don't think that we really have communities anymore. Obviously in some areas, but we just have neighborhoods. We all live in the same neighborhoods, but we're not actually communities. When people throw things and do things and push initiatives, supporting them and standing by them will help create, this community, this bond. And I think that that's just an alternative to, help each other where you can. I think that's an alternative to help people kind of bridge the gap, because I might not know this, but my neighbor might. So now once we're friends and she finds out I don't know that, she's going to help me, and then I'm going to help the girl next door. And it's kind of just this cycle.
I think that a lot of times people think that, organizing, being an activist, supporting your community means something very big. We're just going to do a speech and we're going to, join this organization. But I think that just an advice to anyone listening, one of the key steps to really start is reading. I know a lot of people are why do we have to read? Why do I have to do this? But I think that every single part of us, we have a base, right? You can't just simply do things out of because your emotions are there, because that won't sustain you for a long period of time. So you must be able to look back to your roots and be people before me decades ago wrote about these type of things. And then they're talking about these type of things. And how can I look at those things and put it into the 21st century in 2021? How can that change in this decade, right? And I think that one of the things that like school really does that is very violent is that they make students hate reading. Like they make you read so many books about white people, then they're gonna be like, oh, when you read about your own history, you're gonna hate it too, because that's the same way. But then it's different because when I read about my history, when I read about queer history, when I read about trans history, I'm like, oh my God, these people went through the same thing that I'm feeling right now. And they are telling me so many solutions and so many ways to really resolve these type of things. But then I think that right now, like we just need to have like a big part of like sustainable reading groups, book clubs, really recommend No Name Book Club. I think that's very important. And I think that most of the times when we do read, you get to know like a lot of these politicians, connecting it to voting now. Like politicians will come to you and be like, oh, we're serving you. But then if you look at their background, they have connections to police. They have connections to all these big corporations and stuff. And then you can read on and be like, oh, capitalism. Right? And then, oh, classism, oh, racism, right? So then I think that reading is very crucial and everyone can do that. And I hope that there is more resources out there for people to start reading more.
I like clown nowadays, but I think that a very tangible change-making method was what we saw last summer with a lot of the Black ad accounts. And I ran my schools, and from posting the anecdotes of racism and discrimination that I experienced and that tons of my friends and alumni experienced, we were able to create tangible change, like changing the curriculum, hiring more people of color to work in our schools, and changing relationships with people in the town around our school. Because, you know, there were so many kids who told me that they had gone into the surrounding area and been followed in stores, that the police had been called on them. And through our collective efforts, we were able to change that and, you know, kind of talk to some of the police officers and the police departments and the community associations so they could just know that, you know, we're here as Black people and we pose no threat to you, so you shouldn't treat us like we're a threat either.
As far as getting involved in your community, I think marching is a big way. I'm sure that we wouldn't be able to make these steps if we didn't have these mass rallies. I'm sure a lot of police officers that have gotten convicted wouldn't have gotten convicted without big uprisings from our communities, big marches, other leaders in our community speaking up. But honestly, I don't think it's really our job to fix our communities. We elect people to serve us. You know, the working class is supposed to, you know, wake up, go to their job, and go back and feed their family. But people that we elect are supposed to are the ones that are supposed to fix our problems and solve the problems in our communities.
So like I kind of like disagree with like Kenny about how like, we think that, these people who are voting up, they need to take care of us, so then we don't have to do the work. I think that out of all these kind of things, the way I see our community is that everyone's doing something. It's a collective process. I don't think it's an individual thing where it's like, oh, I vote you up, so you have to do things for me. I see that if I vote for you and you are like in this position of power and you're not doing anything like that, then I will do the thing. Because I think that it's my responsibility. I think that everyone's everyone's business. We all are looking out for each other, and we shouldn't rely on these politicians to be like, oh, you're going to protect me. Oh, you're going to like save me. You're going to protect me from all these sort of violence. Because at the end of the day, if we look at history, if we look at right now, it's always community members serving each other. It's never been about politicians, right? So I think that I'm looking at it more of like at a local level, and I just see that, oh, my friend will be here to protect me more than any of these politicians. Like I expect all of you guys, we will protect each other more than any of these politicians will ever, right?
Well, I think that's a good point, but I think circling back around to the idea of voting, our goal should always be to have politicians that are doing the work for us. They're public servants. They're paid to do this work. So we can do this work out of the kindness of our heart. We can do this work because we care. But at the end of the day, there are people that are getting salary to do this work. So we should hold them accountable. I know that in the past, we've watched politicians be for politicians and not for their communities. And that's why we need to kind of push this voting thing to get all of these politicians out who are for politicians and not for the communities. Because we do this work because we want to do this work, but somebody's getting cut a check for what we're doing for free. So if you're getting cut a check for it, I better see something or you off the payroll.
You might also need to add, like, their salaries are being paid by us.
And I'm really loving this conversation because you guys are bringing out both parts of what activism really is, right? Advocacy for holding our elected officials accountable, that we're trusting you guys to do this job. You have to make sure that it's getting done. But then also civic encouragement, communicating to your communities that this is something that we all have to do change for. We can't just rely on one person or one office to do it for us. We all live in this neighborhood. We all have to contribute that change. And that's all about what activism really is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Anika is saying. I don't think it's one way or the other. And I know in PBSA, we always say at the end, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. And when we say that, it's not just elected officials' duty, but it's all of our duties. Because if we truly do this from love, we truly do this for service, then it's not just about like, oh, I'm not getting a check for this. It's also about like, at the end of the day, I'm trying to make something better. And if I can use the extra time I have to do this, I'm gonna do this. But like we said, we have to hold people accountable because they are getting something for this. And not only is it their duty, but it's also their job.
All right, so our next question really just wants to get into how you guys spread your change. So if you didn't already know, our PA Youth Vote organization is a statewide nation, so we get to talk with you from all over Pennsylvania. So when it comes to your changes and your activism, what is your experience in trying to organize students from across the state and from different cities? Is there any hardships you've faced when it comes to organizing large groups? And what have you guys really done to just get around that?
I'll start off. So I think that activism in typical times and activism in COVID times are really different phenomenons. People are really tired right now. And I think that when you're doing this work, you have to really be cognizant of how people are feeling and what energy they have to give and when they need to reinvest in themselves. So with my work with Redefy, we've been able to do a lot of great stuff just because our organization is like a little older. I think we're maybe like 7-ish years. So, we started before the pandemic, but really just being receptive to our team and listening. Hey, like, are you guys ready to take on this next project? Are you ready to start fundraising for this cause? And then just having team bonding activities when, we're trying to just get back together. And it's an international organization. So we have people in different time zones. We have I think at least 11 chapters domestically. So throughout the United States. And I think that's important because when your team is stronger, then you're going to work better and be able to help more people.
I know one thing that I've been able to do with different organizations is we meet with other organizations. So kind of creating a blueprint. When other activists, I think one thing that's good about activism is take from all these different organizations. They want to give. No one needs to do the work 2 or 3 times. So if you see someone have a model of something, you reach out to them and you ask them, guys, help us build a model that's similar to this because it worked for you and it means it can work for us. So that's something that I've been able to do is, I know at least in UrbEd, we're very Philly based. It's strongly about the Philadelphia school district. We look at other school districts in terms of when we're challenging policy, when we're challenging law. But traditionally, we're fighting and advocating for rights within Philadelphia. But we have people in DC. I know that was our most recent one who've seen different things that we've done. And we'll meet with them on Zoom calls and, take their knowledge and their resources and we give them stuff. So I think that's one of the biggest things, just kind of this exchanging of information and creating a blueprint. I know that even for Philly Black Student Alliance, we have our constitution, and that was based on the Black Panther Party's constitution. So we don't have to, you don't have to create things from scratch to be successful. You can use the resources that are out there and then fit your movement or your campaign into those brackets.
I agree a lot with Youma. So basically, what I wanted to say was Fridges and Family is a community fridge organization in Philadelphia, but by no means were we the first ones in Philadelphia, let alone across the world. I wanted to speak about how social media has been able to expand our outreach by a lot. Someone on Twitter, his name is Justin. He actually randomly just asked me if I wanted to do this community fridge thing. And, we met up and we committed to this idea. And then ever since then, we run Instagram, we have a website, and from there, people have been asking us if they can create their own chapters of community fridges. So that's how we're having people opening up their own community fridges in, Arizona, Minnesota, in New Jersey and hopefully in every state.
I think that I would also like to give a shout out to something called Google Docs, because every single organizer here, we use Google Docs. Every single thing we ever planned out, every single thing that ever happened came from a Google Doc or the Notes app on your phone. That legit, everything comes out of that. And I think that being able to share that document towards everyone and to anyone that we share the link with, then people look at these ideas and then people add on, people give you comments, people give you advice. But I think that during this time with the pandemic, something I really appreciate is how we now have time to go to these workshops that other organizations from other cities, from other countries are organizing, right? Because I recently just went to one that Asian Americans United hosted about Mary, and she was a leader of a Marxist organization at Philly, and she started a lot of the Philly organization, especially around Asian communities. And she was talking about how she was showing pictures, she was showing all the work that she did 70 years ago, and I was just oh my God, you are an elder. Talking to elders, especially across a Zoom platform, that would have never happened in real life, because you have to travel to this place because they're doing a talk in DC and you're in Philly and you're just I can't go, right? So I really appreciate the Zoom platform and how we are able to go to these meetings and be able to in this meeting too, right? Because if it's in real life, we have to meet up, right? So then, but then this is we're all from our own house and it's more accessible and we're all can log on. And I think that one of the things, I'll do one specific thing is gentrification, because I think that gentrification happens everywhere. It happens in Philly, it happens in every single district, it happens in every state. So I think that I was at a workshop that Washington, D.C. youth talked about their Chinatown, about how it's really gentrified right now, because one of the most prominent storefronts in the Washington, D.C.'s Chinatown is a McDonald's and an Urban Outfitters. And there's 300 Chinese people actually living there because all of them left, right? So then learning from that, being that's when gentrification got really bad. So then we don't want that happening now in Philadelphia. So then we're trying to do work to prevent that from happening. So we've been going to a lot of meetings where these developers are hosting meetings for community members, and they don't send these links out. So we have to do the work of sending community members, go to these meetings, because these developers are trying to tell you that, oh, we're going to build housing for you, affordable housing for you. But then at the end of the day, a lot of these housings are for corporations and for offices and stuff like that. It's never for these elders that they originally really talked about, right? And I think that another thing is also about Asian American studies, because we've been getting into contact with a university and we were trying to make it a national thing where students from all across the country, especially from rural areas, especially where there's barely people of color there, for them to be able to apply and go on these summer programs where they learn about this sort of history, because I don't want it to tackle around inner cities, because I think the inner cities is where a lot of our communities are at. So then I'm trying to tackle, especially around the South, the Middle West, when there is a more white population, and they won't learn anything like this unless for this opportunity. So I really appreciate Zoom and Google Docs, because they really made the work much, much easier.
I could not agree more. It has been a godsend having it just at the touch of our fingertips, being able to connect with people from different cities, different states, just all over. So I think that would be a good transition point into our next question about, really, I just want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about what misconceptions you have seen around what activism is. What is something you've seen isn't really the full picture, and how would you speak to that?
I think that sometimes activists with the most wealth and the most kind of familial connections get the most recognition. And then in turn, people don't think that, if they don't have big brand sponsorships behind them, they don't think that they're doing anything that's worthwhile. And that is far from the truth, because there are so many people who will never get recognized in smaller communities who are, handing out food to the children whose parents have to work early every single day. There are people who are hosting clothing drives out of their church basements. My grandmother does that kind of work. And so I think that activism comes in many forms, and you don't have to fit a specific mold in order to be recognized for the work that you do.
I think that's really important. I think people think activism is credit. People think that, especially what you guys were talking about earlier with social media, a lot of people do activism so that they can get a gold star, so that, so they can get a gold star so they can post it on social media, I'm involved in this stuff. That's not true activism. That should never be the goal of true activism. Just to get credit, just to get praise. And I don't think any good activist ever has that goal. A lot of times that stuff just comes naturally when you're doing the things that you're trying to do. So for a lot of organizations, publicity is great. We need that publicity to reach to other people, but we never step into these projects like, oh, we need the government to acknowledge us and give us stars and give us awards for doing these things. And a lot of people go into it with the goal of receiving those things. I think, I think that's really one of the biggest misconceptions. I think also marching. I think people think that protesting is activism. That is activism. That's the extent that activism starts at and ends, and it's not. Marching is not for everybody. It doesn't have to be for you. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. When we go out and march, it's very organized, which means people have to sit down and organize these events. People have to make phone calls and make sure that we have safety measures there, make sure that we have food there. So if you're a person that's like, oh, I'm not going out and marching, which is fine, you can be a person that's working behind the scenes, because all of those different roles, the people that speak at protests are just as important as the people that plan the protest. And I just, there's something I try to stress to people is be happy with where you are in your advocacy journey. I was definitely not a marching person. No, ma'am, wasn't me. And now I am. It's something that I was able to do and realize how much I like it. But before I was like, these people are crazy. I'm like, I'll call and help you guys organize this, send me some pictures, but I don't want to be out there. And that was okay for that point in my life and that time. And I was able to grow and try different things. So, just be appreciative of where you are in your advocacy journey, because, we need people in all these different areas. Everybody can't only march, because who's going to do the work behind the scenes to make that march possible?
I think the biggest misconception is people think it's too early to start activism. I think being young is actually the best time to start. We have the most time. I understand people have school and work, but when you're an adult, you have your 9-to-5 job. You have to take care of your family. You have a bunch of other responsibilities. So that's why I started doing things, because I found that I had nothing to do and I didn't have any major responsibilities, thankfully.
Yep, and that's perfect, because that leads into our last question, which is about adults and connecting adults to student activism, and your experience or maybe your guidance for adults who are listening. So what do you think adults can do to better support or best support student activists and activism in general?
I think for me personally, sometimes I really wish that adults were more curious rather than critical, because I think that a lot of the times when we talked about defunding the police and abolishing the police, adults be like, oh, then what do we do after? That's the point of it. We are dreaming of a new world, and we are starting up with new community-based solutions to these problems. But then a lot of these adults are like, no way, never heard of it. We're not going to go towards that. And I think that so many people are so scared to be like, oh, there's needs to be change, because then it shows that, oh, what they were doing is wrong. A lot of people go to Central, you guys know what I'm talking about. When we promote change or we promote demands, then the schools are like, oh, shoot, then I did something wrong. So then therefore I won't do it, because then if I do what you tell me to do, that means that I am wrong. So I think that I need people adults to be extremely critical of themselves instead of being critical of children, because I think that sometimes they treat kids like, oh, you're adults, you can have opinions, but then there are certain times where you're infantilized and be like, oh, you are a kid, so therefore you don't have anything. And I'm pick a side, right? Don't have double standards, and then we for certain options, oh, I'm a kid, and certain options I'm an adult, right? So I think that being in a classroom, being in any sort of space, any certain circles, adults need to be very critical of how they speak to kids, because I think that they forget that they have a power dynamic. I think that a lot of the times these people overstep their boundaries towards us, and they think that, oh, I am able to joke about this. I'm able to criticize you. And I'm like, but reflect a little bit on yourself, because we do reflections on ourselves all the time. As organizers, we criticize ourselves and we criticize the ways we did things, and we were we're going to make it better, right? Because that's the right thing to do. But a lot of adults don't do that. They just think that, oh, this is the only thing to do, so I'll keep doing it, right? So I think that I wish that they know more about that.
I think something else adults can do is just like listening. There are so many times that I feel like I've been shut down when I've had an idea, but I think the most change arises when people just take the space and take the opportunity to listen to what we have to say. And, our ideas may not be as developed and perfect in their first form, but over time, when you have mentors who are really there to support you and say, okay, so what do you really want to change? Let's get really specific about the issue and really specific about the solution. And I think that's just the best thing that I think they could do in this capacity.
I would just ask adults to remember that fear is not always bad. A lot of adults it's not that they don't support us. They feel that they can't support us because they have too much to lose. But we have a lot to lose if we don't change anything. And I just want them to remember that. I guess I want to say tap into that fearless side, that youth side that you have, because we have a lot to lose. I think about this all the time. Like adults always tell us like, oh, I can't do this. I can't support you guys. I can lose my job. You're talking to seniors in high school for some of us, I'm sorry, who were risking letters of recommendation, who are risking admissions to universities. Like we have stuff to lose as well. But you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Because if we do nothing, we have a lot to lose. And I think a lot of adults sometimes forget to put that in perspectives. We all have something to lose, but is it worth it? And 9 times out of 10, the things that we're fighting for, 10 times out of 10, the things that we're fighting for are absolutely worth it.
A piece of advice I would give to adults listening is to get your children involved early. That's something my parents weren't able to do because they were just way too busy. They had just moved here to the United States. And I think, taking your child out to the voting places, taking your child out to protest will set a strong foundation for them to be leaders in the future.
I think one thing I'll add is like, just because you don't know how to define something, it doesn't mean that people haven't been organizing around these ideas for decades. Like, I think that a lot of people are like, especially around the idea of defunding the police and abolishing the police, they think that this is just something new. But like Angela Davis been writing about this for like 30 to 40 years. And I've been reading her book from like 20 to 30 years ago. And she's been talking about the situation for like the longest times. And Black people have been talking about it around Black theory. Queer people have been talking about it too. These people are like, oh, we never heard of it. It's so new. It's because they're not willing to put in the work for it. So I think that if people really want to disagree with me, put in the work. Because when you just simply say, I don't understand it or I don't know, then I'm like, you're very like, oh, you're not putting time. Like, you're just sitting here to say that to me. And then it gets me very extremely frustrated because I think that organizing and talking and communicating has to be a two-way street, because I can't be talking to a wall when you're just not giving me any sort of like, because the way I'm explaining to you is a form of labor too, because we are doing things that we do out of our own time to support you, right? To tell you things, to teach you, but then you're not giving back the same thing for us, right? So I think that that's kind of like something really hypocritical, because I think that they're always like, oh, you respect me and then I respect you, but then we respect them. They just don't respect us back.
And just emphasis on that has made me really think, I would ask adults to read. I realized that a lot of adults expect us to have all the information, but when we ask them things, they don't have all the information. Read. All of these orgs spend days and weeks and months producing documents that answer all the questions, that fill all the holes that, adults try to poke into these plans. So I would really urge adults to read past slogans. Defund the police. Yes, that's exactly what we want to do. Defund the police. But it's more beyond that slogan that makes sense. Abolish the police. We do want to abolish the police as we know it. That doesn't mean that we don't want safety and protection in our communities. But when you read beyond this slogan and you read the information that's released to you and created by all of these organizations, then you have a thorough understanding. And I found that sometimes we give adults a lot more credit than they give us, because we do a lot more reading and writing than they do. They don't read the stuff that we give to them. They skim it. The same way we skim these books in school, they skim these documents that we give to them.
Yeah, I think you guys definitely touched on it. And I just would add on that I think adults need to not just dismiss these things, and be willing to say, you know what, I'm wrong, you're right. And I think it's like it comes to their pride, sometimes letting go of pride and like following behind the youth and behind these wonderful student activists who've come to speak to us today, because that's how we change things, with fresh ideas. And I think something that stuck with me today throughout this whole conversation is reimagining things and reimagining this world. And some adults are just not able to do that. But, you know, if they sit down and listen to this podcast, then maybe they'll have some more ideas about what reimagining looks like. So I know I said that was our last question, but we just want to wrap it up with what this is about. It's about students. So I guess our last question is like, we kind of touched on it already. I keep saying that. Sorry. But what can our peers do? What can they do to get involved? Like, these are just really like, you know, tangible steps for them to do. It can be really basic things about like shouting out your Instagram your Instagram page, plugging things, plugging websites, plugging books that you think they should read, or even for people who, you know, necessarily don't want to get involved in organizations, you know, what can they do to support these organizations from afar? Because like Youma said, you know, in order to reach liberation, we need people doing all different types of things. So just to wrap it up, for all of our aspiring student activists listening to this podcast, what are some things that they can do right now to get involved and to, you know, follow in your footsteps?
I think that the first step, and by the way, this is Shelby, the first step is self-reflection, because when you look around in your community or you look at your purchasing patterns and what kind of content you're engaging in, you'll start to recognize that there are some things that are unjust and unfair. And so just, you know, maybe looking and seeing, hey, like I'm able to afford this XYZ thing, but the people down the street, they don't have access to that. So what can I try to do to bridge that gap? And sometimes that might not be you spearheading that initiative. That might be you listening to the people who are in that different situation and, you know, from their experiences, providing resources to them so they can work on their own condition and things of that nature. And then I think, you know, just general exposure, interacting with new people, seeking out additional resources is something that's beneficial. And the Redefy Instagram account is We Redefy. My Instagram account is Shelby Williams. And so I post content on there and for Redefy.
I think my advice, you want to go? I keep interrupting you. I'm so sorry. I think that one thing that a lot of youth need to really have is rigor and discipline, because I think that the lives like of our communities are on the line right now, right? So therefore we must work rigorously and with discipline. So then like we must be dedicated, because I think that a lot of us, we are like, I don't know what to do. But then if you're saying that like, I want to provide more resources, if I am bilingual and I can translate resources, be committed in that. Right? I think that a lot of people are like, I can't just keep doing this one thing, but doing this one little thing for a long time, it actually affects a lot of people, because then people are like, I know that a lot of youth have been like making websites where they translate articles into like languages that their parents speak. So then these parents go onto these websites and then they read it. It's legit one tiny thing about translating a single piece of like article, and it became a website. It became a movement, right? And I think that a lot of people need to know that like tiny little things work. It's never been about big things. Don't always think that, we're gonna like do this one big thing, because at the end of the day, you will be burned out. And especially self-care. I really believe in like, you must take care of yourself, because taking care of yourself is already a form of resistance against white supremacy. It's already a form of resistance against oppression, because oppression and white supremacy want you to be tired. They want you to be like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to wait till I'm 50 when I can do something. No, take care of yourself now. It can be a week, it can be a month, it can be 2 months. And shout out to people who commit solidarity with other communities, because all of our fates are tied together. Right? We're all going towards one goal, to fight for a new world. So take care of yourself, honestly, and then just continue to do the work and continue to be committed in the work that you're doing.
The biggest piece of advice I have for our peers is to pick a issue that you're really passionate about to help fix, because honestly, I know we all do things because we care about the issues, but you know, if it wasn't fun, if it wasn't something we were passionate about, we wouldn't be here still doing it. So, you know, for me, I was really passionate about poverty and food insecurity. So that's something I did, and it's something that I can keep doing, because it's something I care about, and it's something that I have fun doing, you know, helping our communities.
I really quick just want to jump in on that. I think that brings up a really good point about everyone listening who might be thinking, well, I don't know what I'm passionate about, or I've had it pretty well. I don't know if there's anything to be advocated for. And I can promise you that there's always, always something that needs change. And really, the best way to start on your activism journey is to just take some time to learn about what's going on around you and what's going on that's not around you. What are other people struggling with that you don't know because you're fortunate enough to live in a good neighborhood, in a good community, a good school, whatever it might be? Just take a little bit of time to find what speaks out to you and then just jump on it and let it flow. Just let it all come out.
My advice would just be to educate yourself by any means necessary. Everybody is not going to pick up a book. Nobody wants to do that all the time. Let's be real. So for some people, it might be reading. For some people, it might be listening to artists who are talking about what's going on in the community. Find a way to educate yourself, because people are always going to assume that people think less of children. I don't know why, but they really do think less of children. And people will speak around you and not to you. And just to kind of develop this respect and help people understand that you know what's going on. You're not dense. And, I think that's really important. I think that's something that really just helped in my journey is educating myself. And it makes you more confident in who you are as a person outside of advocacy. When you know that you know what you're talking about, can't nobody tell you nothing. So, just educate yourself.
All right. Well, if no one else has anything else to add, this was a great conversation. And I definitely think you should keep up with our panelists. We had Chiu, Youma Diabira, Shelby Williams, and Lin Lin. So make sure you keep up with them, keep up with the podcast. And that's a way to educate yourself in and of itself. We're going to be discussing who is going to be on your ballot. We already have a podcast with one of the judges who is running for Supreme Court. And, this is a great way to also, get involved, is joining any of the groups that we're involved in, and including PA Youth Vote. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And